So this bill is timely to restore the public's trust in Singapore's charity sector after a few high-profile scandals in the past years which shocked the nation. I'm heartened to see that there is constant review of the Charities Act, with the last one just 7 years ago, and that we continually seek to strengthen accountability in this sector. I have the privilege of starting my own charity 17 years ago when I was a little boy. ACRES has gone a long way since our birth. In 2001, in my bedroom, in my parents' house, I actually never told my parents I'll use our home address as the first ACRES address, but I guess now is a good time to tell them. I can tell you that it's not easy starting and running a charity in Singapore, and in fact, many said I would fail when I first started ACRES. As a charity fully dependent on donations, I'm aware of the difficulties local charities face in raising funds to sustain their operations. It would be a great pity to see a rare few black sheeps wreak distrust in the charity sector, hampering the necessary work of more than 2,000 registered charities in Singapore. Fundraising success depends on the goodwill of the public, and goodwill is often very fragile, dependent on the level of trust held by the public that the dollar donated makes a positive impact on the lives of the beneficiaries. Trust hangs by a thread, and once broken, is terribly difficult to restore. Thus, I'm encouraged that constant reviews and amendments of the Charity Act help to prevent errant behaviours and ultimately protect the good work of the vast majority of charities in Singapore. However, parts of the bill may have the contrary effect of hampering the charity sector due to lack of clarity. First, the revised definition of fundraising appeal, as proposed in Clause 10, may have a dampening effect on funding for the charity sector. Based on feedback I received and also via Reach, there were questions about whether an appeal includes unsolicited funds. There were also questions of what a confined group of persons mean. Would this refer to private fundraising activities? I understand the Minister had provided some examples earlier, but how do we define small-scale private fundraising? And these small-scale private fundraising activities are commonplace in the charity sector. For example, a bake sale at a company event or a birthday party. Surely the laws will not extend to these cases as well. I hope the Ministry can be clear on certain types of fundraising appeals which can be exempted from which provisions in this Act. Furthermore, charities raising funds for foreign purposes need to apply for a permit, and this requirement now extends to private events. Application permits are an administrative hassle, and unless the application process can be simplified, I fear that this may not bode well for charities which conduct activities abroad, such as humanitarian charities. As I mentioned in my budget cut last year, I quote, "The government is providing funds to help firms scale up and internationalize, and helping build capabilities to operate overseas. We should do the same for our IPCs. We should support our local IPCs who internationalize, who fly the Singapore flag proudly overseas, and who lend a helping hand to our neighbours. Let us not be seen to just venture into other countries to compete, to take, but also to give and to help." Many of these charities and IPCs depend on volunteers and donations from private fundraising activities. There may be a dampening effect on fundraising for these charities, often already faced with additional barriers to fundraising, such as the 80-20 rule. These charities promote the Singapore spirit of generosity in some of the most difficult places and should receive our fullest support. I also raised the issue of crowdfunding, which has been proven to be an effective platform for the needy, but have also suffered a few cases of malpractice. I understand that the Commissioner will be issuing a new code of practice for crowdfunding, but I would like to ask the reason for not including these changes into the Charity Act and thus making them mandatory. On support for charities, I refer to the recent Charity Transparency Awards, noting that only 41 out of the possible hundreds or even thousands of charity assessed by the Charity Council made the cut on disclosure and transparency. This suggests that there is room for the majority of charities in Singapore to enhance their performance in the criteria assessed, such as financial management, internal controls, fundraising management, and conflict of interest. I suspect that this is because most of the charities are resource-strapped. Just like ACRES, we often rely on volunteers, a very small pool of full-time staff members, and limited funding, and are often busy fighting day-to-day fires. Has the Ministry looked at ways we can better support charities, other than those that the Minister had mentioned in the opening speech, especially the smaller ones? Finally, I would like to commend MCCY for its efforts to engage the public, which I hope will become commonplace. I have read the Ministry's response to feedback received through Reach and have found it to be very comprehensive. Each comment received a detailed reply. It also showed that the feedback received from the public was well researched and proved to be constructive. I hope that more bills will undergo similar public engagement, something that I firmly believe will help us to draft the best bill. So these changes will strengthen accountability and public trust in our charity sector and can only reap benefits for beneficiaries we're trying to support. I stand in support of the bill, and I'm sorry, so I forgot to declare at the onset that I declare my interest as the Chief Executive of a charity.